Hello, this is Greg Dixon here with Margo Arrowsmith, and we're going to talk about your perfect retirement living. And I think Margo's got a bit of a touchy topic to talk about today. I think she said, I'm going to be on a bit of a rant. And it's basically here it is, how to have the talk with your
Oh,
family.
exactly. Or the best way for you to do it. Okay, let me back up a little bit. I have a course, Your Perfect Retirement Living, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. This is not handled specifically in the course, but it's something I want to be adding and talking to people about. And let me tell you, it has to do with ageism, by the way, and really respecting people as we get older and us respecting ourselves. Okay, but let me tell you how this started. Now, many of you have probably heard of the rule, the 80-20 rule. Those of you in business probably have, but for those of you who don't know, let me tell you what it is. And let's use a charitable organization that uses a lot of volunteers because this makes it easy. That if you have 100 volunteers, that 20 of those volunteers will do 80% of the work. And whether it's in business or nonprofits, sometimes around the house, frankly, that pretty much works out. I mean, not exactly, but it pretty much works out. Okay, fine. So about a year ago, I got an email. First, I got it from a corporation that runs senior housing, mainly independent and assisted living housing. Then I started getting it from people that I know who are senior care managers, and that really upset me. And let me tell you why. The rule that they came up with is called the 2040 rule. I'm like, what is that? Well, as I went to read it, what it says is that if you are 40 in your 40s and your parents are in their 70s, it's time for you to sit them down and have the talk. I'm like, excuse me? First place, let me say that in my clientele, or even in people that I know, there are a lot of people in their 70s who have their 40-year-old children living in the spare room because of alcoholism or all sorts of things. So just that blanket statement is absurd. However, it gets actually worse. Now, let me say that yes, there are things that all of us have to deal with at the end of life. Now I'm 75. I don't see myself at the end of my life, but even at 75, it's not like, if I were to keel over tomorrow, nobody's going to say, oh my goodness, she died too young. So there are things that you need to do. Having a will is, especially if you have a lot of family or you have several children, having a will is a very good thing to have. If you don't have anybody that you care about, if you're single and don't have any children, a will is a good thing to have if you wanted to go to charity, but it'll go somewhere. What's really important to have is a living will. Now, that is something that if you go into the hospital, say you have a heart attack or a stroke, and you're in very bad shape, the living will does a lot of things, but one of the things it will tell them is, do you want to be resuscitated? And we're not talking CPR, by the way, we're talking heavy duty, tubes down the throat resuscitation. It's a very painful process. And very often when it's gotten to that point, people are never the same again. So what your living will tells you at the hospital, tells the people at the hospital is, do you want that or not? Do you want to just be let go naturally? Very important. And if you have children, that's nice too, so that it doesn't put the burden on them to make that decision. That's a good thing to have. There's a few other good things to have. However, some people have them, some people don't. And my stance is that if you want one, you'll have it. And if you don't want one, you don't. Now, people like me, I haven't quite gotten around to the will yet, so I got to get on it. Some people do need to be nudged. I'm not saying that's not the case. However, with this 70-40 law, I think it's actually 40-70 law, what they say is to 40-year-olds that your parents must tell you a lot of stuff that you may or may not want to tell them. And they do it in a way. Now, they always start out by saying that, you don't want to be manipulative. I agree with that. But then they'll give you a technique. And the technique might be, let me see. You go to your parents and you say, gee, Dad, I've been having this problem. I wondering how to solve it, such as, I've been thinking about making a will. How should I solve that? With no intention at all of asking for advice from your father or mother, but in fact, the next thing you say is, "By the way, do you have a will, and have you thought about that?" Now, that's their version of not being manipulative, and I think everybody that's listening to me now knows that that is about as manipulative as you can get. It's disrespectful. It's assuming that your parents can't be talked to like real people. Okay. All right, and I'm not gonna go into this a whole lot more. I mean, I could, believe me, when I first read that 40/70 law, they had to peel me off the ceiling. I'm gonna tell you that. I'm getting a little used to it, but I think we all need to know what's going on. Um, for instance, if your children say to you, "Do you, what do you want to have happen when you die? What do you want to have happen to your body? Do you want to be buried or cremated, or do you want to be made into compost?" You can do that now. Anyway, and if you don't know, or if you don't want your children involved, you can say, I I would rather not talk to you about it. Now here, like, say you're the children, because some of the children are going to be listening to me too. And I got to tell you guys, your children don't want to do this. Most of them don't. They really don't want to treat you like this, but they're being told this is the way to do it. So I tell the children, because everybody needs to be upfront. And pretending that you're trying to solve your own problem when you really want to guide it, that's not being upfront. All right. So what the children could say is, well, okay, if you haven't decided or you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. That's your right. I do want you to know that if you die and you haven't told us in writing specifically what you want done with your remains, we'll just have to do whatever we want. Now, if we do know, we will do what you want us to do. If you don't know, uh, we'll just have to figure it out ourselves. And that is a respectful, boundary acknowledging way to treat it, but on both sides. Now, hopefully, if they know, they'll say, my parents were wonderful. They paid for their cremation like, 15 years before they died. It was the easiest thing in the world. It's a nice thing to do. But I'm not saying people shouldn't do that. I'm not saying people shouldn't talk with each other, but to have the talk where the children are in charge, that's what you don't want to do. Um, it needs to be respectful. Now, you might ask, well, what does this have to do with my course, Your Perfect Retirement Living? And here's the deal. One of the things that's happening, and one of the things that makes my course so necessary and so important, is that there are a lot of corporations and people out there who want your retirement dollars. And they have built 55 plus communities, which again, many people love. They have built CCRCs. Some people are happy there. I know a lot of people who aren't, but that's another issue. They build all of these things. And many of them know that, frankly, the children, they use scare tactics to get people there. It's like, well, my God, you don't want to be a burden on your children. What happens if there's nobody to take care of you? All of this stuff that doesn't, by the way, happen for most people. But they scare everybody as if that's possible. So we'll solve your problems. You come live with us and give us a lot of money. But that's okay. Again, there are people who need these places and love them and are happy there. My course helps you decide if you're one of them, and then to pick out the one that's right for you. But here's the deal: the people who are marketers and excuse me, what they do is it's sometimes it's harder to convince the person, the parent, in my case, the 75-year-old, that they need this situation, because I don't need it now and I can't see myself needing it. Who knows? Maybe I will. What they've discovered is that it's easier to scare the children. and they get the children scared enough, and then they say, well, gosh, how can I have the talk with my parents? Do you see how that goes around? And then the next thing you know, they're not just asking you a question they didn't need to ask you, because they don't care what you think about their will. They're trying to get you to do it. But they're also kind of trying to push you, and then you feel funny, and then you know what? That's not a good family relationship. And the next thing you know, either the parents are kind of pushed into something they didn't want to do and aren't happy with, or just people get mad at each other. I mean, it's not a good, healthy way for families to talk to each other. One of the things I do, and this is separate from my course, is I mean, I can coach families about how to do this. I'm not saying again, families should never talk with each other about aging issues, but I'm saying there's a way to do it, and there's a way not to do it. And the 40-70 rule is not a rule; it's a marketing gimmick. So, I could go on about this, but I think I've hit all the points. Um, if you're a kid and you want to talk to your parents in their 70s or 80s, there's ways to do it. I can help you with it, but there are other people that can help you. But be careful of going to one of those people who give you suggestions about how to manipulate your parents. Have you ever been in this situation, Greg?
Well, a couple of times. I know somebody is going through their father's in 92, living on his own, on the edge of not being able to live on his own.
Mhm.
And they're, having a conversation about where to go next. Um, I think he would rather just stay there and they bury him on the property.
Uh, well, here's the issue. I mean, there are some people in their 90s and 80s and younger who I mean, there is such a thing as dementia symptoms that actually do involve the brain. There is certainly such a thing as Alzheimer's, although it's very rare. It's like even at the age of 90, it's like 8% of the people have it. But there are times when the parent's cognitive ability is not as good. And you're right, Greg, then that can get a little hairy, it can get a little difficult. The problem is, and again, with this 40-70 rule, they're first place, they're setting the age at 70, which is ridiculous, but they're just making this assumption or putting it in people's minds that that you can't do it. One of my last clients, and he did die while I was in treatment. It was a father and son. The father was in his 90s, and the son was unhappy with him. And they came in, and this was in my office, and I talked with both of them. He was capable of living by himself. Now, that wasn't the issue, by the way. The son was not trying to get him out of his house. But just because your parents are in their 90s doesn't mean that they can't. And again, in your situation, Greg, you knew it, or I think it was friends that you were saying
Yeah.
they knew it, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, he's been pretty capable, but now the closest child is 2 hours away, right?
Right.
And people have been going, one person or another goes probably once a week to help with stuff.
Right.
And
Well,
and
and that's a burden. One of the things, by the way, that I teach in the course, and thank you for allowing me to say this, is that there are other possibilities, such as, hiring somebody else to do it. Which sounds expensive, because every time somebody thinks about hiring somebody, I can't afford that. Well, assisted living for a 90-year-old can be $10,000 a month,
yeah,
and hiring somebody so that the kids don't have to go all the time is a whole lot cheaper than the $10,000 a month. So even there, and I'm glad you brought it up, Greg, because even there's a whole lot of other ways to handle the situation. So father really wants to stay, and unless he, like his advanced Alzheimer's, it has to be tied to his bed, in which case, sometimes you
yeah,
just have to do what you have to do. But just because he's getting a little more frail doesn't mean that he couldn't live there with help. So it's
yeah.
always a good idea, rather than fight with dad, is to look at that first, see what's possible.
Yeah. Well, a year ago, I would have said he would prefer to stay there. I'm not sure what he's thinking now, because he's realizing that he's slowing down, and so a lot of the things that he could do on his property,
He
he's
can't do it.
not doing. He's stopping to do them. So
And what you're talking about, though, that I love is that he's deciding it.
yeah,
He's making the decisions. Even people with dementia symptoms are still adults. And sometimes they do foolish things, and you have to be careful. There are different situations, but they're still adults. And yeah, he's getting to the point where he's thinking, well, maybe it's not worth it staying here. That's actually the ideal, without the manipulation.
Yeah, we had, my one of my partner's mothers was living on her own, and, but it was getting a bit more awkward. She had a bit of a fall and went into respite in a home, and
Mhm.
she, had a bit of dementia. She forgot the other place, and she said, "Well, instead of, having to be talked into it," she says, "I kinda like it. Can I stay?"
That's there you
Yeah,
go. There
so
you go. I mean,
yeah,
even then, what they did, well, it happened because of an accident, but
yeah,
even then, it's like she had the opportunity to see something else, and she made her decision. So there didn't have to be manipulation and fighting
no,
and hard feelings.
yeah,
Um, I mean, it can be worked out better. Um,
yeah,
but if you if you're hiring somebody that says, "Oh, if you're 40, you better start telling your 70-year-old parents what to do," I would go to somebody else.
yeah.
They're not the best people.
So
I mean, go ahead.
So this person was pretty fussy, always complained about absolutely everything, and as dementia set in, she relaxed and didn't complain about anything. She forgot she didn't like me. It was good.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Sometimes that happens. Yeah. But anyway, so that's my rant. I want the 80/40, the 80/20 rule is a real rule. The 40/70 rule is not a rule, it's a marketing gimmick. And again, there are ways if there's things that you want to know about your parents, there are respectful ways to
Yeah,
ask them. And those aren't them. Pretending that you're asking a question about a problem of yours when you're not is not. And it's really, yeah, I recently had I think I mentioned him earlier. This son in his father in his 90s came in. The son was in his 60s, and dad had done something. It wasn't. My son was very upset, and he was angry. They were angry at each other. They were, and they came in. It was like I was doing couples counseling with a father and son, and I'm not, I can't talk about what it was we were talking about, but during the course, I mean, things got a little better. Didn't get totally good, but it got a little better. But one of the things that I loved about this son was he had a friend who was a police officer, and he told him a little bit about what was happening. The police officer says, "Oh, you got to go to the magistrate. You got to get guardianship and take away your father's rights, and you got to fix this." And he didn't do it. He said, "Well, I mean, I'm unhappy with what's going on, but I don't see any need to do that." Not because again, the police officer just was like automatic, like, let's get in there and take over. And he's like, no. Well, anyway, so dad did get sick again. He was kind of had something chronic, and he got sick, and he was in the hospital for a while where he did die. And the son actually came and the father's insurance was paying to see me. So the son actually came in and paid for it himself. But he wanted me to know that the work that the three of us had done together actually, it was, he said, it gave my father and I the ability to be together as he was dying and have a good relationship. If he had done it the way the police officer wanted him to do it, it would have been bitterness and anger to the very end. And and what I told this guy was, I said, you are my hero
yeah,
because somebody wanted you just without even knowing anything very much, just making assumptions, and wanted you to just go in and lay your father low, and you wouldn't do it. I mean, he did insist that dad come to therapy, but he wouldn't do it. And that he was so happy that he'd done it because they
yeah.
had a good death together, the two of them.
Yeah, no, I know a family, that the siblings couldn't agree with on anything, and I guess nobody really asked what their mother wanted, and it ended up really ugly.
Yes, it can.
Basically, I think she and her property became, the this guardians of the state or whatever it is. It was in Canada, but it was, they it and it was she ended up passing away alone in a hospital in a pretty ugly way, and, the kids were still fighting over everything else for probably still are now, but at least 5
Yeah,
years.
and that is I once was talking to a elder uh elder law attorney, and she said to me, she says, I have seen siblings break up and just have huge fights over who's going to get grandma's teapot. I mean, whether or not you have a will, I think one of the reasons it isn't necessarily so much because of the money, because the state will tell who's going to get who when it comes to the money, but stuff that people don't give your children anything to fight over. So, and also, of course, if you do your will early enough, you've got, when they come in with this, this fake rule, you can say, no, don't worry, it's already done. My lawyer has it. Anything happens, you just go to there and it's all done. So that is a good idea, because that's a shame when that happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's because it brings out resentments that, from 50 years ago. And sometimes it's just a shame. And it's too bad that they don't have somebody to help them, because they're losing their relationships with their siblings. And that's always tragic.
Yeah, no, it was pretty sad, and I got caught in the middle of it for a while, but so anyway, so tell us a bit more about your course. What are people going to get in your course?
The reason I did the course basically is because I want people to be able to take over their lives and what they're going to do in their retirement. And by the way, by retirement, I'm using, in your years after 65, because, I'm not retired, but how you're going to live and to do it. And what I start out by doing is putting people through an exercise where it helps them to figure out what exactly is it that they want. Is this thing that they thought they wanted? Sometimes people will go through it and say, oh, wait a minute, it's called your perfect day exercise. And after they go through it, they're like, wait a minute, I don't know where I came up with that, but this is much better, what I just wrote. Then I teach people how to use that exercise. Because there's a 3 more steps after that. And then I talk about all the possibilities. And by the way, next week, I came up with another possibility that's not even in the course. So next week, we're going to talk about that. But so that's the next possibility. And then I talk to people about, let's say you've decided on 55 plus living. Well, when you go look, what to look for, what questions to ask, what you need to get in writing, which is basically everything, by the way, what you need to have looked at by your attorney, which is basically everything, by the way, other than the paint on the walls, but almost everything else. But I teach people how to do that. And then we also have a group on Facebook, which I pop in about once a week, and where people can go and ask questions. And for instance, if they looked at a independent living and they liked it, but they had a question, but they weren't sure the salesperson was giving them the real answer, which happens too often, as you can imagine, they can go to the group and say, have any of you ever heard this? And what do you think? So it's very inclusive about really helping you make the right decision. And it also, we will be talking about kind of like what I did today. It's like, if your children are suddenly afraid that you've made the wrong decision, we'll be talking to people about, well, how to handle that. You don't want to just say, none of your business, get out of my life, but how to handle it so that you and your children's relationship, it gets better. Not only doesn't get worse, but actually can get better.
Yeah. So that'll be great. So that's our subject for next week.
Yes, that's what we're going to talk about. Well, what we're going to talk about next week is that there's another, we did not do a video on it, and I don't think I'm going to, but what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it next week, and then that can be added to the course, because one of the things in this course is that we're constantly looking for new and better ways to do things. So it's a growing course. It's not just static.
Yeah, and also what the best thing is will depend on the person and their family.
Well, exactly.
So these are just
the importance of your perfect day exercise.
And you cover quite a few different considerations that people may not think about on their own. Mm-hmm. So, different factors, how to figure out what you really want and what the options are, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see if there are any questions from our audience. If not, we'll call it good for today.
Yeah.
And we'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yep, that's it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, if you go to your perfect yourperfectretirementliving.com, there's a link where you can go and come right in. And then it's easier to ask questions, because if you found us on Facebook or on LinkedIn, I think it's harder to ask questions, but if you go through the
Yeah.
link, it's easier for you.
Okay. Anyway, okay. See you next week.
Bye-bye.